President, last month, just hours after Congress passed bipartisan legislation to fully fund our federal government, I was privileged to join with Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon and 4 members of the House of Representatives, including our at-large Congresswoman from Delaware, Lisa Blunt Rochester, to lead a congressional delegation to Honduras, Guatemala, and Salvador, 3 countries that are oftentimes collectively referred to as the Northern Triangle. Our delegation was on a fact-finding mission. We wanted to drill down on the root causes of illegal immigration from Central America and assess the effectiveness of a new approach in recent years to help improve conditions on the ground in those 3 states. On our flight to Guatemala, several of us watched as President Trump, in order to build his long-promised wall, declared a national emergency, even though while illegal immigration has spiked in the last couple of months across our southern borders. If you go back to 2001 through the end of 2018, it's actually dropped by, believe it or not, 80%. As former chairman of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, I understand the need for secure borders, and I've supported efforts to enhance border security over the last two decades that I've served in this body. I've been down to Central America any number of times with people like John Kelly, General John Kelly, when he was Southcom commander, with Jay Johnson, with Ron Johnson, both of whom we've served as chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, John McCain, and into that part of the world and along the border, our border with Mexico, to better understand what our needs are for border security. Since 2003, the United States has spent, believe it or not, $263 billion. That's almost $250 billion on border security. We've doubled the number of border agents. We've deployed hundreds of miles of barriers and roads in places where they are most effective. We've funded a highly sophisticated surveillance aircraft, equipment on drones and airplanes, helicopters, mile-high dirigibles, along with motion detectors, high-speed boats, tunnel detectors, and a lot more. The approach for border security on our border with Mexico needs to be multi-layered, and it is. And there's some places barriers do make sense, a lot of places, in fact. And there's some places actually walls, the kind of President Trump has envisioned. Think of San Diego and maybe Juarez make sense. But a lot of other places where different kinds of barriers make sense. Some places roads alongside of barriers make sense. We've deployed aircraft, we've deployed fixed-wing aircraft, we've deployed helicopters, we've deployed drones. And if you just put them out there by themselves, they're not going to do much good. But if you put a highly sophisticated surveillance equipment on each of those platforms, they give us the ability to see from our border into Mexico as much as 20, 25 miles in all kinds of weather. And people as small as children approaching our border, then we know where to deploy our border patrol to meet them and intercept them. We can put the same kind of sophisticated surveillance equipment on dirigibles that go up 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet into the air. We can put them on towers that are mobile, towers that are stationary along the border as well. We can put people on horseback. Can we put, believe it or not, some of our Border Patrol officers on horseback? And the reason why we do that in areas with high vegetation, the Border Patrol officer on a horse, a big horse, can see over the vegetation and pick up people trying to come across the border illegally. Some places boats make sense, high-speed boats make sense, and other places boat ramps make sense. If you don't have boat ramps, you can't put in the boat and you don't have much mobility. Those are some of the things that we've done in terms of providing better border security. And the encouraging news is that a lot of it's worked. A lot of it has worked. But we could build a wall from, the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean, and if that's all we do, people are still going to come to this country, not from Mexico. Not so much from Mexico. People used to come in huge numbers from Mexico. If you look back at the history of the last, especially 15 years, most of the folks who were coming here illegally were coming from Mexico across our borders. Today, it's quite different. There are more people, Mexicans, going back into Mexico than there are Mexicans coming into the United States. And most of the illegal immigration is coming not from Mexico, It's coming from Guatemala. It is coming from Honduras. It's coming from El Salvador. And the trek through from the Northern Triangle, these countries right here, up through Mexico to our border, is over 1,000 miles, probably closer to 1,500 miles, depending on how you want to get there. The spike in immigration we've seen in the last several months, mostly it's coming from Guatemala, from their mountainous highlands, and where you've got a lot of indigenous people, and they don't have a very good lifestyle. They have a lot of malnourishment, a lot of stunted growth there, and not a whole lot in terms of encouragement or economic opportunity. Mr. President, the reason why these people are trying to get out of here, to come up here, let me tell you a quick story. We have in the southern part of our state, Sussex County is our biggest county. We raise enormous numbers of chickens there. For every person who lives in Delaware, Mr. President, there are 300 chickens. I know you have a lot of chickens in your home state too, Mr. President, but got a lot of, and we have a lot of folks who come up from actually this part of the world, including Guatemala. They come up and they work in poultry processing plants. They're good workers, they work hard. We have a nonprofit in southern Delaware, in Georgetown, Delaware, called La Esperanza, means hope. And they work with indigenous populations, illegal and legal migrants that have come to southern Delaware. And a couple of years ago, I was visiting La Esperanza, and they told me the story. They told me a story about a young boy and his younger sister who fled Guatemala. They came to the U.S. and ultimately to Delaware, and this is why they came. 15-year-old boy in Guatemala, approached by gangs in his community, and they said, "Do we want you to join our gang?" And he said, "Let me talk to my parents first before I do that." And you know, in his mind, his parents wouldn't be too excited with that. And so he talked to his parents and said, "You're not going to join a gang. We don't want you to do that. Just tell them no." And so he just kind of avoided the gang members for a while, but they finally caught him, and say, "Well, are you going to join our gang?" And he said, "I talked to my parents, and they don't want me to do that, and so not now. I'm just not going to do it now." And they said, "We have a message for you and your parents. If you don't join our gang, somebody in your family is going to die. Somebody in your family is going to die." He went home, he told his parents, and their message to him was, "Join the gang. Join the gang. Just don't do anything stupid." And so he joined the gang, and they have to go through a initiation ritual, and as part of that ritual, he was called on to rape his 13-year-old sister. He reported this was what was expected of him to his parents, and within a week, he and his sister were on their way out of that country. The gangs in these countries, especially Guatemala, they are entrepreneurial. They may be involved in trafficking people. They may be involved in trafficking drugs. They are really good at extorting money from small businesses. Go into a business and say, I want you to pay me protection money. If you provide protection money, I won't steal. I'll say that you're not harmed." And then the merchant says, "Who are you protecting me from?" And you're actually being protected from the guy who's trying to extort money from you. And if you don't pay the money, they'll kill you. Just like that. And the rate of extortion in these three countries are from gangs who do multiple kinds of crimes. That's one of their favorites. And the reason why people live lives of misery has a lot to do with us. And because we are addicted to drugs, the drugs are trafficked through these three countries, and we're complicit in their misery. We had a Catholic priest, Mr. President, come and testify before the Homeland Security Committee a couple of years ago. And he described a situation where our drug addiction makes life miserable in these three countries. And when they try to get out, we make it difficult to impossible to get into our country. The priest who was our witness that day, he said, it's a little bit like the fire department visits a house down here. And the fire department goes into the house. There's no fire. The fire department goes into the house, they start a fire. And when the people try to run out of the house, the fire department leaves the house, locks the door, and drives away. And that is really a pretty good example of what we've done in Central America. We've lit the fire, we've left a family in the house, and we've locked the door and driven away. Now that is, I think, morally wrong. And we can do better than that. Well, as it turns out, aside from spending $263 billion along the border for security in the last 18 years or so, someone's come up with a better idea. And it's not a new idea. It's an idea that's really based on something called Plan Colombia. Plan Colombia was developed, 20 years ago when in Bogota, the capital of Colombia, you had the FARC, the leftist guerrillas, trying to take down the government. You had the drug lords and drug gangs trying to take down the government of Colombia. And one day, a bunch of gunmen rounded up the Supreme Court justices of Colombia. They took them into a room. They shot him to death. And Colombia is teetering, and questions are going to be able to make it. And some very brave Colombian leaders stood up and said, we're not going to let this happen. We're not going to let these guys take down our country. And our president, then Bill Clinton, and the fellow who was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Joe Biden, found common cause with the leaders of Colombia. And basically, the Colombians developed a plan which would help stabilize their government and enable them to restore order, rule of law, and economic prosperity. And we helped them. I'll give you one example of what we did. Our presiding officer spent a lot of time in the military. One of the things we did is we provided helicopters so that the military of Colombia and the police of Colombia had mobility. And they could go all over a very mountainous, rigorous country and track down the bad guys. And that's what they did, with our help. We helped them figure out how to collect revenues. They didn't collect many revenues, and the wealthy people in that country didn't pay much taxes at all. And we taught them how to do a better job in revenues and to use that to help develop their government institutions. The people in Colombia did the heavy lifting. We helped. It's like they say in Home Depot, Mr. President, you can do it, we can help. And then our presiding officers heard me say in the Homeland Security Committee and the Environment and Public Works Committee, rather, heard me say many times, find out what works, do more of that. Plan Colombia worked. Took a long time. Reminds you a little bit of, I'm an old Navy guy, but it reminds me of like trying to change the course of an aircraft carrier. You stick with it, you can eventually change the course of an aircraft carrier. It doesn't happen fast. And Plan Colombia has taken years to work, but it's worked. And about 3 or 4 years ago, when we're starting to see a real surge, again, in not from Mexican immigration illegally into our country, but these 3 countries, President Obama called on Joe Biden to kind of take off-the-shelf Plan Colombia and see if it might be possible to develop a Central American version of Plan Colombia. And the idea would be to focus on 3 or 4 areas. And we would provide some of the money, but these countries would provide a lot more. And because it's their country, it's not our country. But we're complicit in their misery, so we have an obligation to help them, I think a moral obligation. The three areas that Alliance for Prosperity, modern-day version, Central American version of Plan Colombia. 3 areas that focus are, 1, economic hope, economic opportunity. That's 1. It's one of the major drivers of people getting out of here, lack of economic opportunity. 2nd, violence, lack of rule of law. And 3 is just corruption. Corruption that's endemic in federal government, national government, state and local governments, in business, just endemic. And those are the 3 buckets, if you will, Mr. President, that the Alliance for Prosperity was designed to address. We put up some of the money, the other countries put up a good deal more. One example, Salvador, for every $1 we put up, they put up 7. And we use that money to, among other things, in Salvador, to target 50 of the cities that are most crime. The most crime. And we use some of our resources, but a lot more of their resources. And the crime in those 50 cities down dramatically. in the last couple of years. Honduras, murder rates down by about 35%. These three countries vie for murder capital of the world and have for some time. Murder rates in Honduras down by 35%, 40%. Murder rates in Guatemala and Salvador over the last 3 years down by half. Would we still feel comfortable in those neighborhoods? Probably not. But it's better than what it was. In Honduras, one of the things they did is they basically fired a third of their police officers, replaced them with vetted units. And with that in mind, they did a much better job on extortions, a much better job on kidnapping, and actually bringing to trial and to sentencing the folks who are committing the crimes. We have USAID working down there, and in some of the San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador, in Guatemala, the capital of Guatemala, creating almost like tech centers where young entrepreneurs can start their own businesses, and they get some help from us, some coaching from us, and they are starting to lead an economic recovery. These are beautiful countries, lush, beautiful beaches for some of these places, and so they're attractive on the tourism. They have, for the most part, very fertile soil, and with the right kind of help and coaching and mentoring, they can do a much better job of feeding themselves and exporting a lot of what they raise. But things are starting to happen. Things are starting to happen after 3 years. And again, it's like that aircraft carrier I talked about, Mr. President. Slow at first, and then more perceptible as time goes by. In San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador, again, we use some federal money, American money, in order to leverage Howard Buffett Foundation to literally, in the middle of the city, go into the 17-acre, what used to be a beautiful park, later riddled with crime, and clean it up, make it beautiful again for the people of that city. One national, multinational company has come down in one of these countries and put millions of dollars into creating a DNA facility to help in the solving of crimes. And little by little, things are getting better. Still some problems in Guatemala, the highlands, indigenous people, and who are still trying to get out of there. 90% of the immigration coming right now out of that part of Guatemala. The last thing I'll say is this. They just had an election in El Salvador 4 weeks ago, Mr. President. The current president is a 75-year-old guerrilla leader who is a close friend of Venezuelan leader. He was at Maduro's inauguration a month or so ago. He's friendly with the Chinese, friendly with the Cubans. He is leaving, he's stepping down as the president of that country in a couple of months. Who's going to succeed him? The 38-year-old mayor of San Salvador. 38-year-old, who's gets economic development. He is free of corruption. He is someone that has a good relationship with our embassy there and is highly regarded by our folks. He's an honest guy, full of energy. And in his campaign, he's the first candidate for president in the history of the country that's gotten over 50%. It didn't have to go to a runoff. It's an amazing development. Harness social media to be able to get elected. And meanwhile, there's going to be a presidential election in Guatemala in June. And the three frontrunners, Jimmy Morales is the president there. Somebody that Vice President Biden and I've tried to mentor, and initially started out very promising, and more recently, real concerns about corruption involving his family. But his time as president will expire in about the middle of this year. But in Guatemala, the three frontrunners to run for president are all women. They're all women. And the person who's believed to be the front runner of them all is a woman named Thelma Aldana, who is the immediate past Attorney General. Tough on crime, tough on corruption. And she's been in this country for this month and had the opportunity to talk with Vice President Biden to get some encouragement from him. And he is Joe Biden's beloved in Delaware, but in some other places too around the country. But they really love him here because he's been interested in root causes and not just treating the symptoms of our problems and challenges on the border, but actually helping address those root causes. And the fellow who's just been elected president of El Salvador, 38-year-old millennial, used social media. His social media people have now started to help the former attorney general, who's running for president of Guatemala. As a presiding officer knows, my colleagues know, the most important ingredient in the success of any organization I've ever seen is leadership. And we're seeing a changing of the guard, a little in terms of age, and also in terms of just where they come from, on a scale from 1 to 100. The last thing I want to mention, if I could, Mr. President, find my spot here in my notes. None of this is easy, but it basically says we have a moral obligation to the folks down here. We make their lives miserable because of our drug addiction. We ought to help them. They've got to do most of the work, but we have to help them. And we can't just help them for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of years. As we found out in Colombia, we got to stick with this a good deal longer and to change the culture, help change the culture of these countries. But I'm encouraged, Mr. President, to say that change is happening, and we just should keep it on. There's a sense of optimism that's beginning to emerge in these countries, and I think there's some reason to be encouraged that a plan modeled after Plan Colombia, tailored especially for this part of the world, can actually succeed. And if we don't give up, and especially if they don't give up, they very well will. P.S. The cost of actually capturing somebody up on our border who's trying to come in illegally, detaining them, putting them in a holding camp or a detention center, feeding them, health care, eventually deporting them and sending them back down to wherever they came from. I'm told it's $27,000 a person. $27,000 a person. These people, they love their countries, and given a chance, they'd much rather stay down here. They'd much rather stay down here. And they'd like to come up and visit, maybe do some work sometime, and go back home. But they want to have a decent kind of life, and frankly, if we will help them realize that, they will stay down here. They may come up as tourists, and maybe we can go down there as tourists. But we heard that over and over again. The last thing we heard down there, they love America. They love America. They're mindful of what we're trying to do to help them. They're grateful for the help that we're providing. And I know a bunch of them, met a lot of them down there, and some of them live in our state. For the most part, good, decent people. And they deserve our help. And I'm proud of the support that this Congress has provided for the last 4 years for the Alliance for Prosperity. My hope is it will continue to do that and continue to use that money to leverage a lot of good work, not only in those 3 countries, by nonprofits, NGOs, foundations, private companies, and together we'll get the job done.